The weak morning sunlight seeped through the thick glass and steel of the Zenith building, a proud symbol of financial power in the heart of Chicago. On the gleaming marble floor, shadows stretched long in silence, as if this were not a workplace but a stage for invisible plays about hierarchy and ambition. Into that space stepped Cassandra Brooks alone. She brought no assistant, wore no recognizable badge of prestige, no glint of superficial power. Just a woman of color in a fitted charcoal gray suit carrying a slim leather portfolio and eyes sharp beneath a quiet gaze. As she passed through the revolving doors, she made no sound, but the air seemed to slow. Faces behind glass offices turned toward her. No one knew who she was. No one cared to. To them, Cassandra was an anomaly, a question mark in a world already neatly categorized. She wasn't here for acknowledgement. She didn't come to be seen, but to be heard. As her heels echoed rhythmically across the marble, Cassandra walked toward the elevators where suited executives murmured about deals and dinner reservations. One of them looked at her recognition. Or was it unease? Cassandra didn't bow her head. She didn't smile. She simply looked back calm and unwavering and stepped into the elevator. The brass surface reflected the image of a woman preparing to walk into a space where just her presence was enough to challenge every assumption. But this time, she wasn't just bringing resilience. She was bringing the truth. The elevator stopped at the 58th floor, the level reserved for those who had a voice. The carpeted hallway was so silent that even soft footsteps rang with clarity. Abstract paintings lined the walls, and behind the glass were silent conference rooms where people didn't need to speak loudly because here, power was asserted through glances and silence. Cassandra walked past the fleeting glances that quickly turned away polite, quiet judgment. They saw a woman they didn't recognize with no company badge, no brand affiliation, no entourage. Within seconds, conclusions were drawn she didn't belong here. She approached the executive reception. A woman with a tight bun paused mid-conversation with her assistant when she saw Cassandra. Her voice was polite but cold as stone. "Excuse me, may I help you?" Cassandra looked directly at her unblinking. "I'm here for the 900 a.m. meeting with the Zenith board regarding the EcoStream proposal." The receptionist's eyebrows twitched. "EcoStream," she repeated as if she had never heard of it, then quickly turned to her screen and adjusted her tone. Yes. Please have a seat." Cassandra sat in the waiting area, crossed her legs, her portfolio resting on her lap. She said nothing, but every gesture exuded readiness. Outside, the city buzzed on, but inside a storm was quietly forming. They didn't know that yet. They simply thought she was a black woman with a vague idea. What they didn't see was the weight Cassandra carried: data strategy and a lifetime of being underestimated, making her impossible to break. The frosted glass door slid open. A female assistant in a dark blue dress, her smile as thin as paper, spoke with practiced coolness. "Ms. Brooks, please come in. They're ready for you." Cassandra rose unhurried, unassuming. She walked down a long hallway lined with awards plaques and portraits of successful CEOs, the familiar suit of armor faces of American finance. At the end, a grand boardroom opened and every gaze turned to her. The Zenith Boardroom Cathedral of Power. A long mahogany table, high-end leather chairs. Faces of middle-aged men in tailored suits stared at her with forced politeness. A few women were present, but their expressions were no less calculating. At the head sat Alan Whitmore, Zenith's CEO, known for his cold conservative style. "Welcome, Ms. Brooks. Please have a seat," he said, voice low and commanding. Cassandra took her designated chair not too close to the center to imply authority, not too far to suggest irrelevance. A deliberate placement. She opened her leather case, retrieved the proposal, and began. Her voice was clear and articulate. She presented EcoStream, a sustainable infrastructure overhaul federally reviewed, backed by real data designed for national scalability. The boardroom remained composed, but glances were exchanged, smiles half-formed. Then Gregory Tate, Chief Financial Officer, leaned forward, fingers steepled, a smirk tugging at his lips. Impressive numbers. But have you ever led a project of this scale before? Honestly, it seems a bit ambitious. Cassandra remained calm. I led a federal pilot in Baltimore. $600,000 in seed capital returned over $4.2 million. The detailed report is in your packets. Another board member, Eleanor Green, lifted her coffee cup, voice feather light, but loaded. Numbers are fine, but scaling is another matter. Wouldn't you agree you're taking quite a gamble? Cassandra nodded slowly. It's not a gamble. We have regional partners and regulatory approvals in place. This isn't starting from scratch. It's strategic expansion, not a leap of faith. Her words rang out precise and sharp, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The polite smiles tightened. The questions veered away from the proposal and toward her presence. No one said it aloud. But the looks, the arched brows, the muted chuckles, everything asked. Who do you think you are sitting at our table? Cassandra saw it clearly, but she didn't flinch. She knew they weren't rejecting the plan. They were rejecting her. Cassandra closed her leather portfolio. The motion was slow but firm. The soft click echoed in the tension-thick room like a punctuation mark or a warning. She looked directly at Whitmore, unwavering. Thank you for your time. I believe all necessary information has been clearly presented. Whitmore nodded, his mouth smiling, but not his eyes. Of course. We'll review and get back to you. Cassandra stood. No one tried to stop her. No one offered to escort her out. Only a few smug glances followed her, satisfied, triumphant, as if they had quietly dismissed a nuisance with a cloak of formality. But they were wrong. As Cassandra walked through the heavy wooden doors, she didn't feel defeated. She felt like she had just completed the first phase, an internal assessment of the system exactly as she'd been assigned. A black car waited beneath the tower. City lights shimmered in the light drizzle. The glow through the window lit her face with an air of calm and steel. Her next stop wasn't home. It wasn't a cafe to regroup. It was a nondescript government building marked only by a modest brass plaque near the entrance, Federal Oversight Liaison Office, Chicago Division. Cassandra entered without showing ID. The security guard nodded respectfully, not because of her appearance, but because they knew who she was. She went straight to the top floor where maps, real-time data, and compliance reports from hundreds of companies across the country lit up digital walls. An assistant was waiting outside the executive office. Director Langston is expecting you, Ms. Brooks. Cassandra gave a faint smile. But in her eyes there was no longer just calm. There was fire, the kind that waits for the perfect moment to burn. They thought she had come seeking permission to be heard. No, she had come to assess them, and they had failed. No. Inside the bright war room of the Federal Oversight Office, Director Langston, the head of the Federal Green Infrastructure Task Force, stood as Cassandra entered. "Welcome back, Brooks," he said, voice low and measured but heavy with weight. "We've been watching the Zenith meeting closely." Cassandra shook his hand, her gaze steady. "You've seen the preliminary report." Langston nodded, sliding a thick folder across the table. "And it's worse than we anticipated. This wasn't just a business rejection, it was a textbook case of systemic exclusion." Cassandra sat down. They thought they were dismissing a single mother with a bold idea, when in fact they had just excluded themselves from that very future. Langston sighed. "You showed us the dark underbelly of a system that pretends to be professional. Thank you for not reacting in anger. You let them expose themselves." For months, Cassandra had been working quietly behind the scenes, building documentation, finalizing legal approvals, forging regional alliances, and vetting ethical compliance, all in preparation for a $300 million green infrastructure alliance that Zenith was desperate to secure. What they didn't know: her presentation wasn't a pitch. It was an eligibility evaluation. And they had failed. Langston tapped a document toward her. "Assessment files, meeting transcripts, all recorded. Zenith violated multiple clauses on equitable access and anti-discrimination." Cassandra glanced over the document's face unreadable. "So the disqualification is finalized?" Langston nodded. "Effective immediately." She nodded slowly as if it were the most natural conclusion. "Then I'll prepare the official public notice." Then she looked up, eyes sharp as blades. "But first, I have one more stop to make." Langston raised an eyebrow. "You're going back to Zenith." Cassandra smiled for the first time that day. Not as a hopeful entrepreneur, as the final arbiter. It was late afternoon, and the glass tower of Zenith lit up once again. But no one inside expected the return of the woman they had once dismissed this time, carrying a power no smile could conceal. Cassandra walked through the main lobby, same deliberate steps, same slim leather case, but the receptionist's expression had changed entirely. "Ms. Brooks," the woman stammered as though realizing something she should have known long ago. "Management is in a private session. I'm not sure." Cassandra calmly reached into her coat and revealed her federal ID bearing the Department of Energy seal and a narrow red stripe, the mark of the highest level compliance authority under Green Horizon. "They'll see me," she said gently but unchallengeable. When the elevator doors opened on the 58th floor, the air froze. The same executives who had smiled earlier now turned in stunned silence, eyes shifting from curiosity to panic. Cassandra stepped out like a silent storm. The boardroom doors opened. Alan Whitmore rose startled. "Ms. Brooks, we weren't informed." She cut him off, her gaze unwavering. "You should have been. As of this morning, I've been granted authority to confirm federal eligibility under Green Horizon, and Zenith has officially been disqualified for violations of ethical and access compliance." The room fell into absolute silence. No more smirks, no more chuckles. Cassandra placed the documentation on the table. "You didn't reject the data. You rejected me. And now that rejection has stripped you of the future you thought you controlled." She turned and walked away, leaving behind stunned faces and chairs that no longer felt so stable. The door closed behind her like the final period on an era of unchecked privilege and opened a new one where silence no longer meant submission. She didn't need revenge. She simply let them destroy themselves. Back at her small home in Bronzeville, Cassandra set her leather case down on the table. She was no longer just someone attending meetings, no longer someone pitching ideas. She was now the woman who had just exposed a system once thought untouchable. Lena rushed in and wrapped her arms around her mother. "Mom, did they hear you?" Cassandra knelt, looking deep into her daughter's clear, bright eyes as if passing down something more sacred than victory. They didn't just hear, they saw. And once the truth is seen, it can no longer be ignored. She stood walking to the window and pulling back the curtain, letting the silver moonlight fall over the worn rooftops of their old neighborhood, where thousands like her had once been deemed small, weak, invisible. But tonight one of them had walked into the citadel of power and made it tremble, not with loud demands, but with reason sharpened by lived experience, with data forged through sweat, and with the quiet composure of someone who had once been buried but never broken. The next morning, every major financial outlet across the country ran the same headline: Zenith Capital disqualified from $300 million federal contract over ethics violations, decision signed by Cassandra Brooks. Beneath it was a photo of a black woman with a slim leather portfolio, her eyes sharp as blades, standing before the very building that once shut her out. And in that moment, all of America understood something undeniable. Silence is no longer weakness. Patience is no longer surrender. And one woman walking alone can make an entire system bow. As the screen fades to black, a steady voiceover echoes. She didn't need an invitation to the table. She brought the table with her and laid down a judgment.